the Netherlands could learn from Portugal, for example, on how you deal with drugs policy and how that connects to drugs-related crime and how you could tackle that in different ways than what we've tried in the Netherlands before. So that idea of best practice sharing and knowing how that works and seeing the advantages and disadvantages, that is also really an upside of this pan-European approach that we're trying.
Exactly. And I was thinking, as you were saying this, in our electoral program, we want to use the case of the Netherlands on making the consumption of what do you say in English? Not small drugs, but
light drugs.
Light drugs, yes, like cannabis. I think use the example from the Netherlands of the coffee shops that that has regulation, that has, but also that has an economic role in the sense that it's a legal business, so it brings in taxes and revenue for the economy in a regulated way. So, indeed, we're all learning from each other and implementing best practices from each other. And that's, I think this is something that is very much visible and appreciated. Yeah. One other topic that I'm interested in, you mentioned, Marieke, that is a key topic in your agenda as an MP, is that of political participation. And this is a topic that in both my campaign in the electoral circle of Portuguese immigrants, people that are Portuguese citizens, but it's very hard for us immigrants to actually vote and to have a voice and even be heard in the parliament, even though there are elected parliamentarians there to represent the immigrants. In the end, these parliamentarians often just follow the partisan logic and not really stand for their electorate, that the immigrants that voted for them. And I know that Rebeca is also involved with political participation from minority groups, from having a greater voice of women as well in politics and a more participatory approach. And maybe we can talk about how Volt, this is also as we know, the three of us and many of the people that are following us, it's one of our pillars, the empowerment of citizens and giving voice to citizens. What's happening in the Netherlands on this level, and if there's any, are you working on any policies that also relate with EU migrants? So, for example, Portuguese people and other people that moved within the EU, looking in for more like opportunities or a better lifestyle.
Yeah, that's also a topic. I think in most countries that's here on top of the political agenda as well. I would say it's mainly from the perspective, what do people bring, in the sense of, well, if you do a particular kind of labor and you contribute to the economy, then we welcome you, and otherwise we don't. It's a bit awful to say, I think, but that's the situation how it is. And what we try to do is, and I think Damien has also tried to do that from the European Parliament, is to make the barriers that exist, not just for moving around and for working somewhere, but just to have a life, social security, maybe if you have a family when your kids go to school, to lower those barriers. And that is usually in the sort of nitty-gritty details that you find that there are actually barriers. So people could move to a particular country within EU or within Schengen, but then it's more difficult to do your taxes or to get build up a pension or other kind of social security. Yep. And that is what we try to focus on. And it's also, for example, I've noticed that myself. I've worked for a while in Leuven in Belgium, and by being Dutch, I had to worry a little bit, or it ended up all right, but initially I had to worry about my health insurance, because you have a duty to pay health insurance somewhere, but I didn't really realize that when you move from the Netherlands to Belgium, that could be a major issue, because, well, it's 2 hours away from where I live. So this is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, not just by maybe not just by not just by not willing to do something, but not knowing how to do it and where to knock on whose government's door to actually solve the issue. Now, and that's a bit, I would say that's a huge barrier for what we call the freedom of movement. So that is what we try to lower here in the Netherlands. And that's also where I see that local level can be really useful, because that is basically when you live somewhere, the first government you're going to encounter is your local government. So the easier it is to live in a city, for example, the better that is if you're a labor migrant or a student. And that is also why I think it's very important that we are also present at the local level as a pan-European party. It's one of the reasons, I think. Another reason is because I think at the local level, that's where politics starts, but that's maybe where we can discuss later a bit more. But that is also something, why we should be on more levels than just the European level.
To make those bridges. And actually, this is a reality that also in our electoral circle for the Portuguese expats, we are European citizens, and we have a unique single market for moving and for investing, for retiring, for studying. But actually, in practice, there are many problems in fully having access to this. And one key problem is social security and contributions. And a lot of the Portuguese diaspora is now on a third generation, so an older generation now trying to return to Portugal faces problems, for example, to bring their pensions back and to be able to live in Portugal with contributions made elsewhere. And we also have seen how Portugal has become a sort of a tax paradise for pensionists from across Europe, and in that sense, non-Portuguese European, and not just European, pensionists or retirees, they don't pay any taxes. But if they are Portuguese that were living abroad, they pay heavy taxes because their incomes are much higher than those that of people in Portugal. So these sort of inequalities hinder the actual single market and the freedom that we have inscribed and inspired on our EU policies and treaties. And I think a federal Europe would actually bring solutions for this. And this is one of the things that we've been discussing a lot. I don't know, Rebecca, is there any topic on the political participation? I know this is a topic that you love.
I don't know. I was just thinking about the program that we developed for the migrants. One of the things that came on my mind is the importance for information, to clarify. If you have any doubts, to have a place where you can go and there's somebody to help you, to explain how the world works in that national country. So one of the things that we propose in our program is that in each little town, there is an office responsible to orientate those people, to help them to clarify their own doubts. And I think that's very important. As you said, the systems are all different in different countries of Europe, and that doesn't help either. If you don't know how it works, you get lost. You don't know where you should pay your social security, and your health insurance is also different in every different country. So if there is a main office important, that's not just a consulate, I think that would be very important to exist and to give you the whole knowledge that you need. And that's one of the proposals that we have in our program. So, and not just in the cities, but also in the interior of the country, because we have a lot of migrants also living there without any knowing their own rights and duties. It's been kind of lost, and they are lost and not supported. And there's been human trafficking migrants in Portugal, and it's terrible what we are discovering now with this process and pandemic. And they don't know exactly what are their rights. And this is a very complicated situation that we're living, especially in the south. The people that working on the fields, it's been complicated. And
that's really, I think it's great that you have that. And I think it's also interesting what you say about that actually takes place also in the countryside. That's something maybe we tend to overlook. At least I will speak for myself. I used to overlook that. But now in Parliament, I also deal with agricultural matters. And there you see the exact same thing, actually, as you're describing, that you are actually most vulnerable as a labor migrant in the countryside, more perhaps than even in the cities. So, and I think it's great that you have this initiative.
Yeah, no, it's crucial. It's very important. Yeah. About the drugs, I just had an idea to share. This kind of exchange, my parents worked in that area of drugs. And I remember my father saying, yeah, we had a couple of Dutch specialists visiting our humble department of drugs center. And I think they were amazed that with so little we were able to build such a big system that's working so well. So that was very funny because they were probably expecting something very modern and fancy and just a simple room with the most important things, but nothing very fancy and simple. But it works. That's one of the things that amazes me as a Portuguese, that we with little we are able to build worlds with it. So it does exist, this kind of exchange of knowledge between us, but perhaps it's not just that clear. One of the things that's happening now is those centers are losing their patients because the drugs are different now. The hard consumption, it's getting lesser and lesser. It's much more focused now on alcohol and other kind of vices that are developing, like social networks and game, are the ones that are much more complicated to deal with because it's a completely new way of drugs and they don't know how to approach it. So this is the reality that we are living now. We don't have that many drugs people that use drugs. It's the older generation that still take the hard drugs. The new generation found other ways to ease their pain or to distract themselves or to try to fight their own demons through other kind of instruments, drugs instruments, other vices. So that's the reality that we're living now.
Interesting. And on this topic of political participation and participation in per se, I think one topic that we must talk and not avoid in this case is that we have two women in politics. One is an elected MP, another one is vice president of Volt. And Volt is really passionate about having gender balanced lists and a gender balanced party, but also being a party that achieves a more balanced society in terms of gender. And here we have two women, so I'm always super happy when this happens. And I would like to see from your experiences how, I don't know, how is Volt enabling this, and what can be done to advance this gender balance in Volt and in our societies in Europe.
So who goes first?
You may go.
I think, well, for me personally, Volt helped a great deal. So I was, just a bit of background, so I sort of joined Volt via the policy team, and I wasn't really having politics on mind. I just thought I'd like to help this movement. I think their ideals are great, and I'd like to contribute to the policy. And that was the extent of my vision with Volt. And then at the time that we had established a policy program and elections came in sight, there were a couple of people within Volt that asked me, well, wouldn't you want to be a candidate because you know the policy quite well, so you could bring that to a bigger audience. And that helped me. That to me, looking back at that moment, that was sort of the turning point. Because then I thought, well, if somebody asks me, not just like, do you want to do that, but also what are your concerns for maybe not wanting to do that. And the moment that I had, the time that I had to discuss my doubts with them, that was a turning point. So that made me have enough self-confidence maybe to try and to try out this candidacy and just see how far it would bring me. And to me, that also kind of defines Volt, that within Volt, we're really trying to encourage people to become active within the organization or as a candidate. And I think that helps a lot if you want to have a more diverse candidacy pool and a more diverse group of politicians, is that you actually make space for each other, you help each other out. That to me is the core. And I think within Volt, what we're actively doing, of course, we have a 50-50 rule, and that helps a lot as well, because it pushes us, it motivates us to reach out and to perhaps do a second round of a call when we're looking for political candidates. And sometimes I feel with women in politics, but maybe generally speaking with new people to politics, it helps a lot if you give them the time to feel the waters, to discuss your doubts. And especially being in politics and as being a woman as well, that has some, say, challenges that might also put women off. Of course, for example, how we deal with women on social media, generally speaking. And so these are things that I think you have to, as an organization, also ensure your candidates that you will back them up. And I've always felt that within Volt. So for me, that was extremely important.
That's excellent. Rebecca, do you want to comment on this?
Well,
experiences?
I do understand what Marieke was saying. I was just thinking, I mean, I started with Volt from the early ages. I started in 2018 collecting signatures to start a party. So it was kind of, I don't want to say an adventure, but it was quite an adventure. I was practically the only woman being active. I do feel comfortable with a group of men around me. I think many women do feel scared about it. I didn't. I did try to make my space in it, of course, not being afraid to say my own thoughts. And it's important that we are able, people give us space to fail, to try out, to develop our discourse. Sometimes we are afraid to develop our own ideas and our own sentences. So they are clear, our thoughts are clear, and our ideas are very well proven. Because in the moment that we do a mistake in an environment that's surrounded by men, I think you said that, we have much more risks to be ridiculed. And people say that we are incompetent because we didn't say the correct word, or because our sentence was mixed up. Sometimes the idea is there, but just because we mix it up doesn't mean that we are incompetent. It's just because we are still building our way of speaking in an environment that is not always welcoming. And I think, I mean, from my experience, I did have that space. I did a workshop about feminism, and it was very interesting to see. It was only men practically, and then one woman that participated. I was like, three women that participated. And I was like, okay, it's great. It's 12 men, 3 women, not bad, the group. Let's start to talk about feminism. And it was funny because the late girls, they were much more conservative. They were afraid to use the word feminism, saying that is not useful, that we should not say that word. That's a bad word. That was the women, the girls that say that, not the men. They were like, yes, yeah, we are in favor for socialist feminism and cultural feminism, because I showed the different definitions just to understand how they would build their own thoughts. And the girls were the only ones that said, no, we don't need feminism. And I was surprised, but at the same time, it's a cultural thing also here in Portugal. So it's still seen as a bad word because it's not explained properly. And that was a very interesting experience as a woman and as a Volter in this group of Volters having this kind of feedback from the women.
I think that's I noticed that as well. Sometimes I think in the Netherlands it's like different countries have the same issue in that sense, that feminism is often really perceived as, I think, maybe something with a bit of aggression, even that should be anti anybody else, anti-men. And that's of course not what it's about. And I think that it is great that within Volt I feel that we've had this conversation, and also maybe about the vulnerabilities. I've sometimes had conversations with men saying, well, sometimes I want to learn or I want to make space, but I'm also afraid that I will say the wrong thing, so I avoid the topic. And I always encourage people to speak up in a way that you have a conversation. And often I think anything dealing with women in politics or feminism, generally speaking, it's often really associated with fighting and with debate and having one side and the other side. And that I think we should keep on stimulating in Volt, because I think that's also the reason why a lot of people that join Volt have never been into politics, because they feel there's a certain space here that you often don't encounter. And I think it's even greater if we can establish like a very diverse pool of political candidates as well, not just within the organization, but eventually build up to a great diversity among the candidates.
Mm. Yeah.
And if I may chip in something on this conversation, one thing that I observed in this campaign in Portugal is that candidates that are men and candidates that are women have different ways of communicating their points. There are different ways of behaving in a debate. They have a different, and I would say that maybe they even care differently about even the same topic. So I think this diversity is important because this is also reflected on the other side of the population. So both men and women vote. And if only men are communicating in their ways and their styles, perhaps women will relate less with what's being discussed or communicated, because it's less familiar. Where I find at least in the reality of Portugal, I found it really a striking difference, because we only have 2 women leading in this from all the party leaders. There are 2 women, and then all the rest are men. And in all debates we had, you could see a complete different attitude in which women would never raise their voices in an unnecessary way, or even at all. We just have a dialogue, a conversation, and about different topics. For example, the 2 women, the debate that had these 2 women, we talked a lot about the climate crisis. We talked about civilizational progress on various aspects, including even animal welfare. And these topics were not really touched by all the other candidates that are men. So that was a point there. I don't know if you want to respond to something on this.
Well, I just think it's I recognize that as well, that when you have a diverse group of people, your perspective broadens, and that you would address things differently in the debate, and that generally speaking, there's a difference between men and women and how they deal with maybe confrontation, or in debates, how they present themselves. And what I've often noticed is that there's also this sort of idea, or maybe prejudice, I don't know how to call it, about what is good leadership and what is a strong politician. And that I think in trying to stimulate more people to become active in politics, we also need to work on that idea. Because that idea is really often, well, the strong guy in a suit, to use a stereotype. And that goes with a particular kind of behavior that's not always useful, that's not always the only way to go. And that is what I think, talking about renewing politics, what Volt is in part about, is what we should try and keep stimulating, because I see that as well here, that there's a difference between how women deal with things, how men deal with things, and that is why you want them both at the table.
Both, yeah. Yeah, and feeding back onto what we said before on political participation, then if we have a diverse set of candidates and politicians, and the debate is diverse in that sense, it also will address the diverse society it is meant to be talking to. We have some questions from Facebook from our audience, and maybe at this time now we can bring some. So one of the questions is about tax, and Raquel asks, one of the problems that affects Portugal is the tax differences on companies within the EU. How does Volt see this? Should taxes be harmonized in order to avoid this kind of competition?
That's a good question. Yeah, in a way, there needs to be some form of harmonization, and I'm expressing this in a bit of a nuanced way, because it's difficult to say, well, it has to be taxed everywhere in the same way, because of course each country has their own systems, but you have to always work towards an equal playing field. And that's why, for example, we've also said when it comes to profit tax, for example, for multinationals, we want a European tax. Why? Because it works better, and we can regulate companies better in that way. And I think the same goes for smaller companies, but then you have to always be aware of the particularities of smaller companies. You can't just put a one-size-fits-all solution on that, but you do have to, especially in regions where there's a border in between. So, for example, here we have that in the south of the Netherlands, where we border with Belgium and Germany. You have to be aware that your life is basically across borders, and this is why also your tax regulations has to be in some form harmonized. And this also goes back to what we discussed earlier about removing barriers. Taxes are one of the major barriers to really have cross-border entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm. And in some cases, when we have different taxes within the same EU regulations, then we have loopholes through which companies take advantage to pay less taxes. And some countries will pay a higher bill in terms of losses of taxes than others. And others will have a profit from other countries losing taxes. So back to the initial point that when we think things nationally only, it's not on the collective interest at all, of all.
Yeah.
On the topic of women participation and feminism, somebody asks, can we say that Volt is a feminist party?
I have heard that several times, that question. Yes, why not? I think we do appreciate this movement of he for she, right? This organization, this international organization, and I know that Volt supports that. If we see that in the way that the voters, our companions, support the women in Volt, that's positive feminism, that's social feminism, that's cultural feminism. We are here together to build a better society and for equality. So yes, we can say Volt is a feminist party. Thank God.
Yeah, I agree. I second that.
Yes, I also believe that.
Like that. I mean, it's so important that we empower the women to participate in politics, and that's what I work in my women groups, where we meet once a month and we discuss about it. So yes, no, there's space for it, and I hope it stays like this as a place for opportunity for women, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's indeed true. Like it is, that's what it is now, and that's what we need to also be actively working to keep that and to improve it, of course. But it's not something that comes automatically. And I think even within Volt, we have to be aware of that. Our own assumptions, prejudices can sometimes, influence the way we think, the way we act. And this is why it's good that we always have this topic on mind and that we talk about it a lot.
Exactly. And I see that the audience is very much in agreement with us. A few people are agreeing that we should not be afraid or ashamed of saying that. And indeed, if we acknowledge that the society is not balanced, that there is an imbalance where women have less of a voice and are treated differently, then we do need feminism to bring it, at least we should bring it to balance. So we need to push on the one side that it's not balanced, and that's what feminism is about, I believe. One next question, it's about the Netherlands. And someone asks, as a party of the political center, were there any special expectations for Volt to participate in a governing solution of the Netherlands? And I might add here, in Portugal, we are in a situation that we know the next government will not have a majority. And so a lot of questions have been about whether Volt Portugal being elected would be a part of a governing solution, and what would it be like. So maybe the example from the Netherlands can shed some light here for us.
Yeah, it's a good question, because we've just had sort of the longest government negotiations in history here in the Netherlands. I mean, it took almost 10 months. We've just got a new government. And we did have to deal with the question of Volt joining a new government eventually. I mean, eventually, because it started off, of course, with the bigger parties discussing, and we've always, also during the campaign, we've always said we're new to the political landscape, we're fairly new as an organization, so we want to be constructive opposition because we want to have the time to build up our organization, to do it in a good way, with enough attention for our core values. And when you jump into government right away, that might also bring you down in the end. And in the Netherlands, we have at the moment 19 parties. So there's quite some options for a government, for stable government to be formed. But because it took such a long time, in the end, we were asked. We politely declined because of the arguments I just gave, and I think it was understood. And that's of course different in every country. Here it mattered a lot that we do have other middle center parties that have experience in politics, that would have experience in governing. So there were alternatives, and we've always said, well, if we're out of alternatives, of course we want to be constructive, and we'll never say no fully. But we would sort of, as an advice to all the other parties and to this country, we want a stable government. So we would advise you not to pick the youngest party on the block for now. And that actually was sort of taken well. And I think everybody kind of understood our position. But we've also said, now we are in opposition, that we will always be constructive and that we would still keep the middle center in sight. And I think for Volt, that's, for the Netherlands, that worked. For Portugal, of course, I can't really say what would be the best way to go. But I think having this constructive mindset and approach, and also sometimes just be fairly open about your considerations, pro and cons, can also help in that process. Because it helped us a lot. Because we just also, when we were asked by media, by journalists, we've always said, well, these are our considerations and this is our decision. And that was kind of taken well. I think because we were quite open and everybody understood in the end, well, a young political movement, you need to give that time to grow. And that's
a really good piece of advice in a sense, but also comes across very sensible as a position of we want to contribute to the politics of this country, but we acknowledge that we first want to establish and mature ourselves in this system more before actually jumping into the power system. I believe you've grown a lot in this 1 year. Actually, we keep seeing how the polls are giving a great growth of Volt also for the local elections. And what would you say from this 1 year? What's behind this trend, and what is it that Volt is bringing that actually is addressing the electorate so positively, the people?
In part, of course, it's our ideas and our vision. That is for sure what makes people enthusiastic. I think what, particularly in the Netherlands, what caught people's eyes are that we are nuanced and sometimes modest. And that's how strange it might sound. That's sort of new. And what we've always tried to be is also that we've also always tried to be positive, in the sense that, I mean, we do see concerns, and that's what we want to be in politics, to change and to improve. But we've always sort of embraced the fact that we want to work together with other parties. We want to see the entire society and the entire of Europe, and not just the group that we represent. And that helps, I think. That is, in the Netherlands, something that, I always want to be, I don't want to put other parties down. But what you see in politics now, that it can be quite volatile sometimes. And that being sort of nuanced and positive is a new sound, and that helps. During campaigns, for example, we've always consciously decided we will not attack our counterparts, our colleagues. We will always just tell our own stories. And if that suits you as a voter, that's great. And if it doesn't suit you, that's also fine. And I think that helped, because that made us sort of the young, positive sound in politics, where it can be quite cynical sometimes, and where it can be quite hard and also personalized, and that's what we did not do. And I think that is in part why we grew and why people sort of trust us with their vote.
That's again really insightful piece of information and experience. And I think, Rebecca, I don't know if you agree, but I think for us that also here are dealing a lot with these perspectives that people have about a new party and what it is about and who are these people. I think this is it sounds like the season 2 of Volt, as in what it evolves into with time and with growth. Before we finish, there's one last question that I think is quite relevant to bring, which is about the federal aspect of Volt. So somebody asks, does Volt want a United States of Europe, or do you think that reforming the current institutions, Parliament, Commission, is enough to build the Europe of the future?
So I would say, oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just still thinking, what's the difference? Because the reform that is needed is to build a federal Europe. I mean, if you want to have less bureaucracy, to have this tax harmonization that we were just talking about, that is equal, that doesn't give tax havens to other countries. I mean, the question would be probably more, what kind of reforms?
I think what the person says, and he said before that I'm not Portuguese and I didn't vote for Volt, but it's still interesting to listen to these points. I think what he means is, should we reinvent our European sovereignty like we have in the other side of the Atlantic, where you have 50 states together in a United States of America? Or if we just reform what we already have is enough? And if I may say, our president, Tiago Matos Gomes, he one day said something that I think explains it very briefly, very well. In Portugal, we have many parties that consider themselves pro-Europe, like the big parties. And so they believe in this intergovernmental organization, the EU, that works under these treaties and these institutions, but in the end is a series of countries together that relate more closely because of these treaties. But Volt is more than pro-Europe. Volt is federalist, and in that sense, Volt wants to give a step forward from where we are with our intergovernmental EU to an EU that has its own tools and mechanisms, which through federalism, so for example, through a directly elected parliament and government and president, that allows policies to be implemented from this point of view of the citizens, so from the direct vote of citizens, but that have application across countries. And this is not the United States of Europe, but it's not just reforming the EU in the current terms. It's actually, it's a season 3 of the EU, let's say. It's the next phase. In the same way that one day we introduced a single currency that changed substantially how the EU works. I think federalism would too. But would you like to comment anything?
No, I would tend to agree with that, and would add that often when we think of federalism, we have this sort of fear that everything needs to become the same, and that if you think of the United States, that you would all have the same language, and I think that is where we in Europe will differ. A federalist Europe does not mean the same. It means that you have diversity, and in that diversity you have a sense of unity, and you have a sense of common values that you all promote, protect, and a sense of solidarity between those different cultures. But I agree that on a greater level than just reforming the EU Commission or the European Parliament, we have to work towards having mechanism, for example, like abolishing tax differences that really just form barriers, so that we can, and I think in the end that will increase our own sovereignty, so that will make us stronger to be diverse. The Netherlands is such a tiny country. On our own, we're really we can't really do anything. If you compare us to the US or to Russia or China, we're useless in that sense. But within the EU, we're stronger. And I think the same goes for working together on social equality matters, or matters of you name it, actually, because I think on different matters, when we work together, we're stronger. And that is how you should see a federalist Europe, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can't agree more.
Yes, I think that's exactly our vision. And it's a challenge, I think, to communicate this, because it's a complete new concept. Yeah. But in my experience, at least in the campaign and talking to people, it's actually a concept that sounds very much aligned to what people understand is necessary to address the challenges that we are facing. I think it's unequivocal that to address issues like the climate crisis, which we haven't spoken here, but also issues that, as we talked on tax evasion, on security, drug crime, and international crime, and so many other matters, migrations as well, and refugees, and that we can't just as a country believe that we can address it within our own borders with our usual traditional mechanisms of policy, and that will address it. We are getting a lot of engagement, but it's time. I don't know if we have time for more questions.
Well, we could, I don't know, if we could continue for a little bit, and then maybe
choose an interesting question.
So we have another one on there was one on gender, about gender parity, and one about the federalism. So the one on gender is, what do you answer to someone who says gender parity or ethnic quotas are a threat to meritocracy?
Okay, long silence.
Yes.
I would say that I think then they are drawing two things together that really should not be together. That quotas and parity, I mean, they're meant for what we said earlier, to basically equalize something that has not been equal, and not for fair reasons, for reasons of history, of culture, things that should basically not matter in where you are in a society, and how society values you, and that whether you're a woman or somebody from maybe a different ethnic background, that really should not matter. But you see that there's inequality there. And what we know also from research, this is not something that we feel, but we know from research that when we look for people to hire, or when we look for people to, I don't know, become friends with, we look for somebody that looks like you. So when you've in society established inequality, you will automatically reinforce that inequality. And that's not because we're bad people or whatever, but because it's human behavior to look for the one that looks like you. And this is why, you need to use quotas, because change will not come automatically. It's too deep in the details of our society. It's too deep inherent to how we function, that sometimes you need to give that a bit of a push.
Yeah, I think that too. I mean, I was just thinking about strategies to prevent this kind of use of quotas, but I think it's also necessary for them to exist. I mean, it's we need that push. I mean, it's not ideal. It's not an ideal approach. It's not an ideal mechanism, of course. I mean, we do want to reach our place in power because we deserve it in a way, not because I'm a woman or part of the quota, but because what I do as a person. And I think that's also comes up with this question of the quotas. But at the moment, I can't see anything else, because we are still, like you said, Marieke, still culturally prevented to reach the higher power or to get into politics as a woman. there's not a lot that needs to be done to normalize it, to see us as a person and not as a gender.
And I think it's also, in other areas of policy, for example, climate policy, we don't mind setting quotas because all the objectives we have for lowering CO2 emissions, for example, those are quotas. So it's actually a super common instrument if you want to achieve something. So establishing a goal and forcing yourself to reach that goal is simply a way of progressing and of pushing yourself, motivating yourself to break through old habits and old cultural assumptions, perhaps. And to me, it's always interesting because when it comes to gender equality, we tend to sort of question that policy instrument. When it comes to climate change, for example, we don't question that, or we question it way less, at least.
Exactly. I was thinking here of this analogy that has been made with on discrimination or prejudice or racism or all these hindering elements of a society, of us all being in a race, in the same race, but some of us start in the starting point and some others are pushed back before the starting point. So the race, when they start, they're already behind everybody else. And in a sense, quotas, they are not fair in the sense that they push people forward without racing them. But actually, it's fair because they shouldn't be starting before the starting point. So, in a sense, it doesn't. The question is about meritocracy. It's not really fitting within meritocracy, but actually, if people are not in the same starting point, then how can they be judged only on their merit if they're not starting with equal conditions? So I think it's about providing equal conditions for everyone to start whatever they want to do. I think people are maybe it's time for dinner in Portugal because it's already 8:30 and
we have dinner at 6 o'clock, so that's like long behind me.
Yes, 6 o'clock. So maybe you'll have it.
The Netherlands is really an opposite in this sense to Portugal.
Yeah, in Portugal it's more around 8 or 9. So maybe people are getting hungry now. But this was a really, really fantastic conversation with you, Marieke and Rebecca. And I was really thrilled. This conversation will stay live, so we can share it on social media and people will be able to see it on all pages of Volt Portugal, YouTube and Facebook particularly. And if there's any other questions, feel free to write them to us on social media or email. And thank you once again, Marieke, for spending your evening with us tonight. And
I'm glad I was invited.
We stay in touch, Marieke.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And we are just 5 days, I think, from the election. So
exciting times.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a roller coaster. You don't stop. You don't stop. It's not, but it's fun. It's fun too.
Lots of coffee and yeah.
Thank you to you, and thank you to everyone that was following us on social media. And let's stay in touch. And until the end of this campaign, spread the message through friends and family to vote Volt on Sunday. And Sunday, we hope to have a fantastic result to change the scenario of politics in our parliament. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.